The wrench slipped from 8-year-old Aria Collins' oil-stained fingers as the distant rumble of helicopter rotors cut through the desert morning air above Sunset Mesa, Nevada. 24 hours earlier, she'd been just another poor kid crawling under the hood of a stranger's broken sedan on Highway 341, her small hands instinctively diagnosing what 3 professional mechanics couldn't fix. The stranger, Defense Department official Stephen Rogers, had watched in silent amazement as Aria's intuitive genius brought his engine roaring back to life. Now, as twin Blackhawks descended toward her family's weathered trailer, kicking up clouds of red dust and rattling every window in the neighborhood, Aria realized that sometimes being exceptionally good at something comes with a price nobody warns you about. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The story began 26 hours earlier on a Tuesday afternoon when the ancient school bus wheezed to a stop at the corner of Desert View Road and Highway 341. Aria stepped down onto the cracked asphalt, her backpack stuffed with textbooks she'd already read twice, and a plastic bag containing the sandwich she'd saved from lunch. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly, turning the metal bus stop sign into a furnace that nobody dared touch. "See you tomorrow, Aria," called Martha Cooper, the bus driver, a weathered woman whose kind eyes always lingered a moment longer on the children she knew went home to empty refrigerators. "Yes, ma'am," Aria replied, adjusting the straps of her worn backpack. She watched the bus lumber away in a cloud of diesel exhaust before turning toward the cluster of mobile homes that made up the poorest section of Sunset Mesa. The Collins family trailer sat at the end of a dirt road, its aluminum siding faded to a dull silver that reflected the harsh desert light like a broken mirror. A small vegetable garden struggled against the sandy soil beside the front steps, tended by Mrs. Hazel Suzuki, their elderly neighbor who had somehow coaxed tomatoes and peppers to grow in this unforgiving landscape. "Afternoon, Aria," Mrs. Suzuki called from where she knelt among the plants, her sun hat casting shadows across her weathered face. "How was school today?" "It was good, Mrs. Suzuki. We learned about fractions, but I already knew most of it." Aria paused at the chain-link fence that separated their properties. "Is Mama home yet?" Mrs. Suzuki's expression softened with the particular sympathy reserved for children who grow up too fast. "Not yet, sweetheart. She picked up an extra shift at the diner. Won't be home until after 9. Aria nodded, accustomed to the rhythm of her mother's exhausting schedule. Carla Collins worked double shifts at the Desert Rose Diner whenever possible, chasing tips and overtime hours that might finally add up to something more than just survival. The mathematics of poverty were something Aria understood, with the same intuitive clarity she brought to mechanical problems. Every dollar counted, every opportunity mattered, and there was never quite enough of either. Inside the trailer, Aria dropped her backpack on the small kitchen table and surveyed their modest home. The living room and kitchen occupied a single space, separated only by a narrow counter topped with faded linoleum. 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom completed the layout, every square foot utilized with the efficiency born of necessity. The walls were thin enough that she could hear Mrs. Suzuki humming in her garden, and in winter, the heating bills forced them to huddle together in the living room with blankets and space heaters. But it was home, and Aria had learned to find beauty in the way afternoon sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting geometric patterns across the worn carpet. She had also learned to appreciate the silence, the way the desert seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, offering a kind of peace that people in crowded cities never experienced. Aria changed out of her school clothes and into the coveralls that had once belonged to a mechanic's apprentice before finding their way to the thrift store, where her mother shopped. The fabric was stained with oils and greases from previous owners, but Arya had added her own marks over the past 2 years, evidence of her growing expertise with engines and machinery. She retrieved her toolbox from under her bed, a collection of implements gathered from garage sales, dumpsters behind Rex Burton's auto shop, and the occasional gift from sympathetic adults who had witnessed her unusual abilities. The tools were mismatched and well-worn, some held together with electrical, tape and determination. But Arya knew each one intimately. She could identify a Phillips head screwdriver by touch in complete darkness, could hear the subtle difference between a loose bolt and a stripped thread. The walk to Burton's auto repair took 15 minutes across the desert landscape, following a footpath that Arya had worn smooth over countless trips. Rex Burton owned the only full-service garage in Sunset Mesa, a collection of buildings clustered around a gravel lot where broken vehicles sat baking in the sun like metallic sculptures. Burton himself was a man of contradictions, genuinely skilled with engines but lacking in patience, capable of kindness but prone to exploitation when he sensed an advantage. "There's my little miracle worker," Burton called as Arya approached the main garage bay. He was a thick-set man in his 50s, his grey hair perpetually disheveled and his clothes permanently stained with automotive fluids. "Got 3 vehicles. Here that are making my regular guys scratch their heads. Think you can work your magic?" Arya had been coming to Burton's garage for nearly 2 years, ever since the day she had wandered over during a school holiday and correctly diagnosed a transmission problem that had stumped Burton's 2 full-time mechanics. What had started as curiosity had evolved into an informal arrangement. Arya would troubleshoot difficult problems in exchange for $20 and the opportunity to learn from watching the professionals work. The arrangement benefited Burton enormously. Arya's diagnostic abilities had saved him thousands of dollars in trial-and-error repairs and had earned his garage a reputation for solving impossible problems. Customers drove from as far as Las Vegas when their vehicles developed mysterious ailments that other shops couldn't fix. Burton charged premium prices for these consultations while paying Arya a fraction of what her insights were worth. "What's the first one?" Arya asked, setting her toolbox down near the hydraulic lift where a blue pickup truck sat with its hood raised. Engines running rough, losing power on acceleration. "Pete and Carlos both say it's probably the fuel injectors. But I'm not convinced. Take a listen." Burton started the engine, and Arya closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. To most people, a running engine produced a generic mechanical noise, but Arya heard layers of information in every revolution. The rhythm of the pistons, the whisper of air through the intake, the subtle harmonics of combustion. Each element told part of a story. "It's not the injectors," she said after 30 seconds. "The timing's off, but not from the distributor. Something's causing inconsistent compression in cylinder 3. She moved to the engine bay and placed her small hands on different components, feeling for vibrations and temperature variations that others might miss. Her fingers traced the spark plug wires, tested the tension of the drive belts, and finally settled on the valve cover. "Valve spring's weak," she announced. "Probably cracked. That's why the compression drops intermittently." Burton shook his head in amazement, the same expression he wore every time Arya performed her diagnostic magic. "Carlos, come over here and pull that valve cover. Check the spring on cylinder 3. 20 minutes later, Carlos held up a valve. Spring with a hairline crack running down one side. "How does she do that?" he muttered. Not for the first time. The second vehicle, a sedan with electrical problems, yielded its secrets just as readily. Arya traced the symptoms to a corroded ground connection behind the dashboard, a location that would have required hours of methodical testing to discover through conventional troubleshooting. The third car, an SUV with mysterious transmission. Issues? revealed itself to have a problem with the torque converter lockup solenoid, a diagnosis that would typically require expensive computer analysis and partial disassembly. 3 for 3, Burton said, counting out $60 in rumpled bills. You're going to put every diagnostic computer out of business, kid. Arya folded the money carefully and tucked it into her coverall pocket. $60 represented almost as much as her mother earned in tips during a good shift at the diner. It was grocery money, utility money, or perhaps a contribution toward the rent that always seemed to arrive faster than expected. "Mr. Burton," she said, her voice carrying the careful politeness of a child who has learned to navigate adult relationships with precision. "Do you think I could maybe watch Pete rebuild that transmission on the Ford? I've never seen the inside of a 4R70W before." Burton's expression shifted slightly, revealing the internal calculation that always occurred when Arya asked to learn something new. More knowledge made her more valuable to his business, but it also made her more aware of her own worth. It was a balance he managed carefully, sharing enough information to maintain her interest while ensuring she remained dependent on his opportunities. "Maybe next week," he said. "We're pretty busy right now, and Pete's got to focus on getting that job done quickly." Arya nodded, recognizing the polite dismissal for what it was. She had learned to read the subtle signals that indicated when her presence was welcome and when it had become inconvenient. The ability to diagnose mechanical problems seemed to come with an unfortunate side effect, an increasing awareness of how people managed and manipulated situations to their advantage. The walk home took her past the Desert Rose Diner, where she could see her mother through the large front windows, serving coffee to the afternoon crowd. Carla Collins moved with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to maximize every motion, carrying multiple plates, refilling drinks, and maintaining the bright smile that encouraged larger tips. At 32, she looked older than her, years worn down by the relentless pressure of raising a child alone while working multiple jobs to keep them housed and fed. Arya didn't stop at the diner. Her mother's work required complete focus, and interruptions, even from family, were discouraged by Frank Kowalski, the owner who tolerated no deviation from maximum productivity during busy periods. Instead, Arya continued home, where she would prepare her own dinner, complete her homework, and probably fall asleep reading one of the technical manuals she had borrowed from the library. The evening passed in familiar routines. Arya heated a can of soup, worked through math problems that felt absurdly simple, and spent an hour studying a manual on electronic fuel injection systems. The technical information fascinated her in ways that her school subjects never did. Every diagram and specification connected to real-world applications she could visualize and understand. By 9:30, when her mother's tired footsteps finally climbed the trailer's front steps, Arya was already in bed, listening to the sounds of Carla's end-of-day routine, the refrigerator opening and closing, water running in the bathroom, the soft groan of the couch springs as her mother finally allowed herself to rest. "How was school today, baby?" Carla's voice drifted through the thin walls. "It was good, Mama. I helped Mr. Burton with some cars after school." "That's nice, sweetheart. Did you eat dinner?" "Yes, ma'am. There's soup left if you're hungry." The conversation followed the same pattern every night, a ritual of connection that bridged the hours they spent apart. Carla Collins loved her daughter fiercely, but the demands of survival left little time for the kind of involved parenting she had imagined when Arya was born. She knew her daughter was exceptional. The teachers had mentioned Arya's advanced abilities, and the situation with Burton's garage was clearly unusual. But the luxury of nurturing those gifts felt impossibly distant when every day was consumed with earning enough money to keep them afloat. Neither mother nor daughter could have imagined, as they settled into sleep that Tuesday night, that the following afternoon would bring an encounter that would change everything. A broken-down car on a lonely highway, a chance meeting with a stranger whose recognition of Arya's abilities would set in motion events neither of them was prepared to handle. The desert night settled over Sunset Mesa with its characteristic silence, broken only by the distant howl of coyotes and the occasional rumble of freight trains crossing the vast Nevada landscape. In the Collins family trailer, two people slept the exhausted sleep of those who had learned to find rest wherever they could claim it, unaware that tomorrow would test everything they thought they knew about their quiet, predictable lives. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Wednesday. Morning arrived with the same relentless heat that had defined every summer day in Sunset Mesa for as long as anyone could remember. Arya woke to the sound of her mother's alarm clock buzzing through the thin trailer walls, followed by the familiar sequence of hurried preparations for another double shift at the Desert Rose Diner. By the time Arya emerged from her small bedroom, Carla was already dressed in her uniform, her dark hair pulled back in the practical ponytail that would survive 12 hours of constant movement. "Morning, baby," Carla said, pressing a quick kiss to the top of Arya's head while simultaneously checking her apron pockets for order pads and pens. "There's cereal on the counter, and Mrs. Suzuki said she'd keep an eye out for you after school." "I might go help Mr. Burton again today," Arya replied, pouring milk over the generic cornflakes that represented the intersection of nutrition and economy in their household budget. "He said he might have more work for me." Carla paused in her preparations, studying her daughter's face with the mixture of pride and concern that had become her default expression whenever Burton's garage entered their conversations. She understood that Arya possessed an extraordinary gift, something that transcended normal childhood interests in mechanical things. But she also recognized the complex dynamics at play when adults discovered that an 8-year-old could solve problems they couldn't handle themselves. "Just remember what we talked about," she said carefully. "If Mr. Burton asks you to do anything that doesn't feel right, or if he gets angry about something, you come straight home. You don't owe anybody anything, no matter how much they pay you." Arya nodded, though they both knew the economics of their situation made such independence more theoretical than practical. $60 here and there made the difference between paying the electric bill on time and receiving a disconnection notice. Still, Carla's words served as an important reminder that her daughter's gifts shouldn't come at the cost of her safety or dignity. The school day passed with its usual mixture of boredom and social navigation. Arya's teacher, Deborah Knight, had long since given up trying to challenge her academically within the constraints of a third-grade curriculum designed for average 8-year-olds. Instead, she had developed a system of independent study projects that allowed Arya to explore more advanced concepts while the rest of the class worked through basic arithmetic and reading comprehension. "Arya, I've got some new library books that came in yesterday," Mrs. Knight said during lunch period. "There's one about renewable energy systems that I thought you might find interesting." Mrs. Knight was one of the few adults in Arya's life who seemed to understand that extraordinary abilities came with their own set of challenges. She had taught elementary school in Sunset Mesa for 15 years, long enough to recognize when a child was operating on a completely different intellectual level than their peers. More importantly, she understood the delicate balance required to nurture such gifts without creating additional social isolation. "Thank you, Mrs. Knight. I've been wondering about solar panel efficiency ratings," Arya replied, accepting the book with genuine enthusiasm. "Do you think the school district would ever consider installing solar arrays? The math on energy saving seems pretty compelling." Mrs. Knight smiled, though her expression carried a touch of sadness. "In a better world, Aria Collins would be in accelerated programs, surrounded by intellectual peers and resources designed to challenge her exceptional mind. Instead, she was trapped in a small desert town where her abilities made her an oddity rather than an asset, valuable primarily for the immediate problems she could solve rather than the potential she represented. The afternoon brought the familiar ritual of the school bus ride, with Aria claiming her usual seat near the front where she could observe the desert landscape rolling past the windows. Highway 341 stretched endlessly toward the horizon, a ribbon of asphalt that connected Sunset Mesa to the larger world beyond the mountains. Occasionally, vehicles would pass in the opposite direction, delivery trucks heading to Las Vegas, tourists, or V's exploring the backcountry, or government cars on mysterious errands that took them far from main population centers. Today, as the bus approached Aria's stop, she noticed something unusual. A dark sedan sat motionless on the shoulder of Highway 341, its hood raised and steam rising from the engine compartment. A man in a business suit stood beside the vehicle, holding a cell phone to his ear with an expression of profound frustration. "Looks like somebody's having car trouble," Martha Cooper observed, slowing the bus as they passed the stranded vehicle. "Poor fellow's probably been sitting out there for hours. Cell service is pretty spotty in this stretch." Aria pressed her face to the window, studying the scene with the automatic interest she brought to any mechanical problem. The steam pattern suggested an overheating issue, but the way the man was gesturing at his phone indicated he had already tried the obvious solutions. Most people's understanding of automotive problems ended with checking fluid levels and hoping the issue would resolve itself, leaving them helpless when faced with anything more complex. The bus wheezed to its usual stop, and Aria gathered her belongings with uncharacteristic urgency. Something about the stranded motorist had captured her attention in a way that transcended simple curiosity. Perhaps it was the professional quality of his clothing, which suggested he was far from home and probably unfamiliar with the realities of breaking down in the Nevada desert. Or perhaps it was the mathematical certainty that his situation would only deteriorate as the afternoon heat intensified and his chances of receiving professional assistance diminished with each passing hour. "See you tomorrow, Aria," Martha called as Aria stepped off the bus. "Yes, ma'am," Aria replied, but her attention was already focused on the figure beside the disabled sedan, now barely visible in the distance, but still clearly stranded and increasingly desperate. She walked quickly toward home, her mind racing through the possibilities. The smart thing would be to mind her own business, complete her homework, and perhaps earn another $60 at Burton's garage. The responsible thing would be to tell Mrs. Suzuki about the stranded motorist and let the adults handle the situation through proper channels. But Aria had never been particularly good at ignoring mechanical problems, especially when she suspected she might be able to help. The same intuitive understanding that allowed her to diagnose engine troubles also made her acutely aware of human distress, particularly when that distress stemmed from the kind of technical difficulties that others found overwhelming. She dropped her backpack at the trailer and retrieved her toolbox, stuffing it into an old canvas bag that would be easier to carry across the desert terrain. Mrs. Suzuki was working in her garden, humming an old Japanese melody while tending to the vegetables that somehow flourished despite the harsh environment. "Going to help Mr. Burton again?" Mrs. Suzuki asked, noticing the tool bag. "Maybe," Aria replied, which was technically true even if it omitted the more immediate destination she had in mind. "I'll be back before Mama gets home." The walk to Highway 341 took 20 minutes across scrubland, dotted with Joshua trees and the occasional pile of sun-bleached bones left by desert scavengers. The heat was intense, but not yet dangerous. Aria had grown up in this environment and understood how to pace herself and recognize the early signs of heat exhaustion. Still, she carried a water bottle and planned to make the encounter as brief as possible. As she approached the stranded sedan, she could see the situation more clearly. The man was probably in his 40s, with graying hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was accustomed to having problems solved quickly and efficiently. His suit was expensive, but now wrinkled and stained with perspiration, and his expression had evolved from frustration to genuine concern as he contemplated spending the night in his disabled vehicle. Stephen Rogers had been driving from a classified meeting at a military installation outside Las Vegas when his rental car had begun showing signs of trouble. The initial symptoms, a slight increase in engine temperature, a barely perceptible loss of power, had seemed manageable until the cooling system had failed catastrophically 50 miles from nowhere. He had called for roadside assistance, but the service representative had informed him that the earliest a tow truck could reach his location would be the following morning. As a senior official in the Defense Department's Advanced Projects Division, Rogers was accustomed to having resources at his disposal that could solve most problems quickly and quietly. But the Nevada desert had a way of reducing everyone to the same fundamental vulnerability, regardless of their security clearance or government connections. His phone showed 1 bar of signal strength, his water supply was limited, and the temperature inside the car was approaching dangerous levels. He noticed the small figure approaching across the desert before she was close enough for him to determine her age or gender. In his line of work, unexpected encounters required careful evaluation. The location was remote enough that chance meetings were unusual, and his current mission involved sensitive information that couldn't be compromised. But as the figure drew closer, revealing itself to be a young girl carrying what appeared to be a tool bag, Rogers began to reconsider his initial caution. "Excuse me," Arya called when she was still 30 feet away, employing the careful politeness she had learned for dealing with unfamiliar adults. "Are you having car trouble?" Rogers studied the approaching child with professional interest. She was clearly local. Her clothes and bearing suggested familiarity with the harsh environment, but there was something unusual in her confidence and the purposeful way she carried her tool bag. Most 8-year-olds would be intimidated by the sight of a stranded adult, especially one whose obvious distress would be apparent even to a child. "Yes, I am," he replied, maintaining the neutral tone he used in uncertain situations. "The engine overheated, and I'm waiting for a tow truck that won't arrive until tomorrow morning." Arya approached the vehicle and immediately began her diagnostic process, though she was careful to maintain a respectful distance from the stranger. The steam had subsided, but she could smell the distinctive odor of overheated coolant and see the puddle of fluid that had leaked onto the asphalt beneath the engine compartment. "Would you mind if I took a look?" she asked. "I'm pretty good with engines, and sometimes there are simple fixes that can get you going again." Rogers found himself in an unusual position. His training emphasized maintaining operational security and avoiding unnecessary interactions with civilians, but his current situation had already compromised his mission timeline significantly. Moreover, there was something about the girl's manner that suggested competence rather than childish curiosity. "I appreciate the offer," he said carefully, "but this seems like a pretty serious problem. The cooling system failed completely, and I'm not sure it's something that can be fixed on the roadside." Arya nodded, acknowledging his concerns while maintaining her focus on the mechanical evidence before her. Sometimes cooling system failures look worse than they are. "Would it be okay if I just listened to the engine for a minute? I won't touch anything without your permission." The request was so polite and professional that Rogers found himself agreeing despite his reservations. "Sure, go ahead." Arya moved to the front of the vehicle and asked Rogers to start the engine. The sound that emerged confirmed her initial Suspicions. The cooling system failure was real, but it had been caused by a secondary problem rather than a primary component failure. She listened carefully to the rhythm of the engine, noting subtle irregularities that suggested the root cause of the overheating. "You can turn it off now," she said after 30 seconds. "I think I know what happened." Rogers shut off the engine and studied the young girl with growing interest. Her diagnostic approach had been methodical and professional, far more sophisticated than he would have expected from someone her age. Moreover, her confidence suggested she had significant experience with mechanical problems. "What do you think is wrong?" he asked. Arya moved closer to the engine compartment, pointing to specific components as she explained her analysis. The cooling system failed because the water pump bearing seized, but that happened because the serpentine belt was slipping. "See how there's belt dust around the pulleys? The belt probably needed replacement about 5,000 miles ago, but it was still working well enough that you didn't notice the performance degradation." She traced the belt path with her finger, showing Rogers how the slipping belt had failed to maintain proper tension on the water pump pulley. When the pump couldn't maintain adequate coolant circulation, the engine overheated and the remaining belt material failed completely. The good news is that the engine probably isn't damaged. It just needs a new belt and some coolant. Rogers stared at the 8-year-old who had just provided a more comprehensive diagnosis than the roadside assistance technician had managed during their 20-minute phone conversation. "That's remarkably detailed analysis. How did you learn so much about automotive systems?" "I help out at the local garage sometimes," Arya replied, maintaining the careful modesty she had learned to employ when adults questioned her abilities. "Mr. Burton lets me work on cars that have complicated problems." The statement was true, but understated the reality of her role at Burton's garage. Rogers, however, had enough experience reading people to recognize when someone was downplaying their capabilities for social reasons. The girl's analysis had been precise and comprehensive, delivered with the kind of confidence that came from extensive experience rather than theoretical knowledge. "Do you think it's something that could be repaired here?" he asked. Arya considered the question carefully. "I'd need to see if I have the right size belt in my kit, and we'd need coolant to refill the system. But if the engine isn't damaged, it should be fixable." Rogers made a decision that would change both of their lives in ways neither could anticipate. What would it take to try? Arya opened her canvas tool bag with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to make every motion count. The collection of implements inside told the story of resourcefulness born from necessity. Wrenches held together with electrical tape, screwdrivers with worn handles, and a carefully organized collection of salvaged parts that most mechanics would have discarded years ago. But everything was clean, properly maintained, and arranged with the kind of systematic precision that spoke to genuine expertise rather than casual hobby interest. "I've got 3 different belt sizes that might work," she said, pulling out a small collection of serpentine belts in various lengths. "The trick is getting the routing right and making sure the tension is correct. Too loose, and it'll slip again. Too tight, and it'll damage the bearings." Stephen Rogers watched with growing fascination as Arya spread her tools on a clean cloth beside the disabled sedan. Her movements were economical and purposeful, the kind of efficiency that military training tried to instill in personnel, but which seemed to come naturally to this 8-year-old desert mechanic. More intriguing was her systematic approach to problem-solving. She wasn't simply attempting a quick fix, but rather conducting a comprehensive evaluation of the entire system. "Before we install a new belt," she continued, running her small fingers along the various pulleys in the engine compartment, "I need to make sure all the components are properly aligned and that there isn't any other damage that would cause the same problem to happen again." She tested each pulley for smooth rotation, checked the tension on the automatic belt tensioner, and examined the water pump housing for signs of bearing wear or seal leakage. Rogers found himself impressed not just by her technical knowledge, but by her methodology. She was conducting the kind of thorough diagnostic evaluation that he had seen trained technicians skip in their eagerness to implement quick solutions. "The water pump seems okay," Arya announced after several minutes of careful inspection. "The bearing seized because of the belt slippage, but it freed up once the pressure was relieved. The seals look good, and there's no play in the shaft. We should be able to get you running again." Rogers had spent 20 years in government service, much of it evaluating people's capabilities under pressure, and he had never encountered anyone, regardless of age, who approached mechanical problems with such systematic competence. "Where exactly did you learn to do all this?" Arya selected the appropriate belt from her collection and began threading it around the various pulleys according to the routing diagram she carried in her memory. "I've been helping Mr. Burton since I was 6. Before that, I used to watch mechanics work on cars and try to understand what they were doing. My mama says I've always been curious about how things work." The statement was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing an unremarkable hobby, but Rogers recognized the implications. Most children showed interest in mechanical things at some point, but developing genuine expertise required thousands of hours of focused practice and an intuitive understanding that couldn't be taught through conventional methods. The girl working on his engine possessed capabilities that would be remarkable in an adult technician. "This might be a little tricky," Arya said, stretching the new belt around the final pulley. "I need to release the tensioner to get the belt seated properly, but I'll need you to start the engine once I've got everything in place. The belt has to engage correctly on the first try, or we'll have to start over." Rogers positioned himself behind the steering wheel while Arya made final adjustments to the belt installation. Through the windshield, he could see her working with the focused concentration of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. Her small hands moved with absolute confidence, testing the belt alignment and ensuring that each pulley was properly engaged. "Okay," she called. "Turn the key and let it run for about 30 seconds, then shut it off. I need to listen for any unusual noises and make sure the belt isn't slipping." The engine started immediately, running with a smoothness that had been absent during the overheating episode. Rogers listened carefully, noting the absence of the grinding noises and irregular rhythm that had preceded the cooling system failure. After the prescribed 30 seconds, he shut off the engine and emerged from the vehicle. "How did it sound?" he asked. Arya was already checking the belt tension and examining the pulleys for signs of misalignment. "Perfect. The belt's tracking correctly, and all the components are working as designed. But we still need to refill the cooling system before you can drive anywhere. The radiator's completely empty." She had anticipated this requirement and produced a gallon jug of coolant from her tool bag, along with a funnel that had seen better days but still functioned adequately for its intended purpose. Rogers watched as she carefully filled the radiator, adding the coolant slowly to avoid air pockets that could cause new problems. "Where did you get automotive coolant?" he asked, genuinely curious about the level of preparation that had gone into her portable repair kit. "Mr. Burton lets me take home leftover fluids sometimes, especially when they're close to their expiration dates. I keep a basic supply for emergencies." Arya finished filling the radiator and replaced the cap with precise attention to the proper torque specification. "The system should be fine now, but you'll want to keep an eye on the temperature gauge for the first few miles. If there's any air trapped in the system, it might cause temporary overheating until it works its way out." Rogers started the engine again and watched as the temperature gauge climbed to its normal operating range and stabilized. The cooling fan engaged and disengaged according to its programmed cycle, and there were no signs of the distress that had stranded him an hour earlier. The repair had been completed with professional efficiency by an 8-year-old using hand tools and salvaged parts. "This is absolutely remarkable," he said, shutting off the engine and studying Arya with undisguised amazement. "You've just accomplished something that I was told would require a full garage facility and several hours of professional repair time." Arya began packing her tools with the same systematic care she had shown during the repair process. Most cooling system problems look worse than they really are. People get scared when they see steam and assume the engine is ruined, but usually it's just a secondary failure that's relatively easy to fix if you understand the root cause. Rogers found himself conducting a mental calculation that had nothing to do with automotive repair and everything to do with the strategic implications of what he had just witnessed. His position in the Defense Department's Advanced Projects Division required him to identify and evaluate unusual capabilities that might prove valuable to national security interests. The military was constantly seeking personnel with exceptional technical abilities, particularly in areas involving complex problem-solving under pressure. But this was different. Arya Collins wasn't just technically competent, she possessed an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that transcended conventional training or education. Moreover, she had demonstrated the kind of calm competence under pressure that was typically associated with years of professional experience. The fact that she was 8 years old made her abilities even more extraordinary. "Arya," he said carefully, "has anyone ever talked to you about the possibility of pursuing advanced technical education? With abilities like yours, there might be opportunities for specialized training that could—" "I'd better get home," Arya interrupted politely but firmly. "My mama will be worried if I'm not back by the time she gets off work." Rogers recognized the deflection for what it was, a child's instinctive caution when adults began discussing changes to her established routine. But the brief exchange had confirmed his growing suspicion that Arya's situation was more complex than it initially appeared. Her clothes, tools, and general circumstances suggested a family struggling with economic hardship, while her abilities represented talents that could command significant value in the right contexts. "Of course," he said, reaching for his wallet. "What do I owe you for the repair?" Arya shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I was glad to help." The response surprised Rogers, who had expected her to negotiate some form of payment. In his experience, people who possessed valuable skills were quick to capitalize on opportunities to be compensated for their expertise. Arya's refusal to accept money suggested either exceptional generosity or a child's incomplete understanding of the economic value of her abilities. "I insist," he said, pulling out several $20 bills. "Professional services deserve professional compensation." Arya looked at the money with obvious interest but maintained her polite refusal. "Really, it's okay. I just like fixing things." Rogers studied her for a long moment, recognizing the complex dynamics at play. The girl clearly understood the value of money. Her family's circumstances would make that understanding unavoidable, but she also seemed uncomfortable with the idea of charging a stranger for assistance rendered during an emergency. It was a level of ethical sophistication that impressed him almost as much as her technical abilities. "At least let me give you my business card," he said, producing a simple white card with minimal information. "If you ever need anything or if you're interested in learning more about advanced technical careers, please don't hesitate to contact me." Arya accepted the card and read it carefully. Stephen Rogers, Senior Project Coordinator, Department of Defense. The title was deliberately vague, offering no specific information about his actual responsibilities or the nature of his work. But to someone familiar with government operations, it suggested significant authority and access to resources. "What kind of projects do you coordinate?" she asked. Rogers chose his words carefully, mindful of both security considerations and the need to provide an honest answer to a child who had just performed an extraordinary service. I help identify new technologies and capabilities that might be useful for national defense. Sometimes that involves working with people who have special talents or abilities. Arya nodded, though Rogers suspected she understood more than her polite expression revealed. Children who grew up in economic hardship often developed sophisticated awareness of adult motivations and the complex relationships between talent, opportunity, and exploitation. "I should really get home now," she said, shouldering her tool bag. "Be careful driving through the mountains. The cooling system will be a little more sensitive until all the air gets worked out." Rogers watched her walk away across the desert landscape, her small figure gradually disappearing among the Joshua trees and scattered rock formations. The encounter had lasted less than 2 hours, but it had fundamentally altered his understanding of what was possible when exceptional ability emerged in unexpected places. As he drove toward Las Vegas, monitoring the temperature gauge and following Arya's advice about mountain driving, Rogers was already formulating the report he would submit to his superiors. The Defense Department's Advanced Projects Division was constantly seeking individuals with extraordinary capabilities, particularly in areas involving rapid problem-solving and intuitive technical understanding. Traditional recruitment methods focused on universities and established training programs, but they occasionally missed exceptional talents that developed outside conventional educational systems. Arya Collins represented exactly the kind of unusual capability that could prove invaluable for advanced defense projects. Her diagnostic abilities alone would be worth developing, but her systematic approach to problem-solving and her calm performance under pressure suggested potential applications far beyond automotive repair. The question was how to approach the situation without disrupting a child's life or exploiting her family's obvious economic vulnerability. By the time Rogers reached his destination, he had made a decision that would set in motion events neither he nor Arya could fully anticipate. The Defense Department's talent recruitment protocols included provisions for exceptional cases, situations where unusual abilities warranted immediate evaluation and potential development. Arya Collins, the 8-year-old desert mechanic who had saved his mission timeline, definitely qualified as an exceptional case. The first call he made from his hotel room was to General Marilyn Webb, his immediate superior and the officer responsible for advanced capability assessment. The conversation would be brief and to the point, but its consequences would reshape everything Arya thought she knew about her quiet life in Sunset Mesa, Nevada. General Marilyn Webb was reviewing classified intelligence reports in her Pentagon office when her secure phone rang with the distinctive tone that indicated a priority call from field personnel. At 53, Webb had risen through the military ranks by developing an instinct for recognizing genuinely important information amid the constant stream of routine communications that defined modern defense operations. Stephen Rogers had never called her outside established protocols unless the situation warranted immediate attention. "Rogers, what's your status?" she answered, noting the timestamp and automatically beginning the mental process of correlating his current location with ongoing project requirements. "Ma'am, I need to report an unusual encounter that may have significant implications for our advanced capability recruitment protocols," Rogers replied, his voice carrying the careful formality that indicated sensitive information was about to be discussed. Webb leaned back in her chair, recognizing the tone that preceded reports of exceptional discoveries. In her current position overseeing the Advanced Projects Division, she had learned to distinguish between routine talent identification and the rare cases that represented genuine strategic opportunities. Rogers had been conducting field evaluations for 7 years, and his judgment had proven reliable in situations requiring rapid assessment of unconventional capabilities. "Go ahead," she said, activating the secure recording system that documented all significant personnel discussions. Rogers provided a detailed account of his encounter with Aria Collins, emphasizing the technical complexity of the diagnostic process, the sophistication of her repair methodology, and the systematic approach she had brought to solving his automotive emergency. He was careful to include specific details about her tool selection, diagnostic reasoning, and the professional quality of her work, understanding that Webb would need concrete evidence to evaluate the strategic implications. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Webb said when Rogers had finished his report. "An 8-year-old civilian working with improvised tools on a roadside in Nevada successfully diagnosed and repaired a complex mechanical failure that had disabled your vehicle." "Yes, ma'am. But the repair itself isn't what makes this significant. It's the methodology she used and the level of systematic thinking she demonstrated. I've worked with trained technicians who couldn't have approached the problem with that level of competence." Webb had spent enough time evaluating personnel to recognize when someone was describing genuine, exceptional ability, rather than simply an impressive but ultimately routine performance. Rogers' emphasis on methodology and systematic thinking indicated capabilities that transcended specific technical knowledge, the kind of intuitive problem-solving abilities that were extremely difficult to teach but extraordinarily valuable when properly developed. "What's your assessment of her family situation?" she asked, already beginning to consider the practical implications of potential recruitment. "Economically disadvantaged, single-parent household. The mother works multiple jobs to support them, and the girl appears to have significant unsupervised time. She's been working informally at a local garage, which suggests the family needs supplemental income." Webb understood the strategic significance of Rogers' observations. Exceptional abilities that emerged in economically vulnerable families created both opportunities and ethical complications. The Defense Department had extensive experience with talent recruitment, but cases involving children required careful navigation of legal, ethical, and practical considerations that didn't apply to adult personnel. "I want a full background evaluation completed within 24 hours, she said, making notes on her secure tablet. Financial records, educational assessments, family stability indicators, and a comprehensive review of local social services. Involvement. Also run a preliminary security clearance evaluation on both the mother and the child." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you want me to initiate direct contact with the family?" Webb considered the question carefully. Direct military contact with civilian families often created complications that were difficult to manage, particularly when children were involved. However, exceptional capabilities required prompt evaluation to prevent them from being lost to competing interests or compromised by inadequate development resources. "Not yet. I want to conduct a field assessment first. If this girl's abilities are as significant as you're suggesting, I need to see them myself before we initiate any formal recruitment discussions." Rogers understood the implications. General Webb was one of the military's most experienced evaluators of exceptional personnel, with a reputation for identifying capabilities that others missed while avoiding the recruitment mistakes that had complicated previous talent acquisition efforts. If she was willing to conduct a personal field assessment, it indicated that his report had been taken very seriously at the highest levels of the Advanced Projects Division. "What's my timeline?" he asked. "I'll be in Nevada within 48 hours. Arrange for covert observation opportunities, but maintain operational security. I don't want the family to know they're being evaluated until we've determined whether formal recruitment is warranted." Webb ended the call and immediately began the process of coordinating a field assessment mission. The Advanced Projects Division maintained rapid deployment capabilities specifically for situations involving time-sensitive talent evaluation, and Aria Collins's case clearly qualified for immediate attention. Within 2 hours, she'd arranged for helicopter transport, assembled a small evaluation team, and initiated the background investigation that would provide essential context for her assessment. Meanwhile, 60 miles away in Sunset Mesa, Aria was following her familiar evening routine, unaware that her afternoon act of kindness had triggered a sequence of events that would fundamentally alter her family's circumstances. She had returned home from the highway encounter with enough time to complete her homework before her mother arrived from the diner, maintaining the careful schedule that kept their household functioning despite the challenges of Carla's demanding work requirements. "How was your day, baby?" Carla asked as she settled onto the couch with the exhausted relief that marked the end of another double shift. Her uniform was stained with coffee and food, and her feet ached from 12 hours of constant movement, but she maintained the bright interest that had always characterized her interactions with Aria. "It was good, Mama. I helped someone fix their car after school," Aria replied, providing the simple version of events that wouldn't worry her mother unnecessarily. Carla had learned to read the subtle indicators that revealed when Aria's mechanical activities had been more significant than her casual description suggested. There was something in her daughter's tone, a mixture of satisfaction and thoughtfulness, that indicated the afternoon's events had been more complex than routine assistance at Burton's garage. "What kind of car trouble?" she asked, settling back into the cushions that had molded themselves to her body over months of evening conversations. Aria described the encounter with careful attention to the technical details, while omitting the more concerning aspects of helping a stranger in an isolated location. She explained the diagnostic process, the repair methodology, and the satisfaction of successfully solving a complex problem. But she didn't mention Stephen Rogers' obvious official status or his interest in her future educational opportunities. "That sounds like pretty serious work for someone your age," Carla said, though her tone carried pride rather than criticism. "I hope this person appreciated what you did for them." "He tried to pay me, but I told him it wasn't necessary. He seemed nice, and I could tell he was really worried about being stuck out there." Carla studied her daughter's expression, recognizing the ethical sophistication that had guided Aria's decision to help without expecting compensation. It was the kind of moral clarity that she had tried to instill through example rather than lecture, but seeing it demonstrated in practice filled her with a mixture of pride and concern. Generosity was admirable, but in their economic circumstances, it was also a luxury they could rarely afford. "You did the right thing," she said finally. "But remember that your skills are valuable, and it's okay to be compensated when you help. People solve their problems. There's nothing wrong with charging fair prices for professional work." Aria nodded, though both mother and daughter understood the complex dynamics that governed interactions between children and adults, particularly when those interactions involved economic transactions. Aria's refusal to accept payment had been motivated partly by generosity and partly by the instinctive caution that children learn to exercise when dealing with unfamiliar situations. "Mama," Aria said carefully, "do you think I'll ever be able to go to college, to study engineering or something like that?" The question hung in the air between them, carrying implications that extended far beyond simple academic curiosity. Carla had always known that Aria possessed exceptional abilities, but the practical realities of their financial situation made advanced education seem like an impossible dream. College required resources they didn't have and couldn't realistically expect to acquire through conventional means. "I hope so, baby," Carla replied, choosing her words carefully. "You're so smart, and you understand things that most adults can't. Figure out Maybe there will be scholarships or other opportunities when you're older. It was an optimistic answer that masked more complex concerns. Carla understood that exceptional abilities in children often attracted attention from adults, whose motivations weren't always aligned with the child's best interests. She had seen enough exploitation in her own life to recognize the warning signs, and she was determined to protect Arya from situations that might compromise her daughter's well-being for the sake of advancing someone else's agenda. They spent the evening in comfortable routines, shared dinner, homework assistance that Arya rarely needed, and the quiet conversation that bridged their different worlds of experience. Carla talked about her day at the diner, describing the regular customers and their predictable orders, while Arya shared her observations about the renewable energy book Mrs. Knight had provided. Did you know that solar panel efficiency has improved by almost 40% in the last 10 years? Arya asked, her enthusiasm brightening her expression in the way that technical subjects always did. And the cost per kilowatt hour has dropped even more dramatically. It seems like the economic argument for renewable energy is becoming overwhelming. Carla listened with the mixture of comprehension and bewilderment that had characterized her relationship with Arya's intellectual development. She understood enough to follow the basic concepts, but the depth of her daughter's analysis often exceeded her own educational background. It was simultaneously gratifying and isolating to raise a child whose mind operated at levels that required constant effort to understand. Maybe you could design better solar panels someday, she said, offering the kind of encouragement that had always defined their relationship. Maybe, Arya replied, though her tone suggested she was already considering the practical challenges involved in transforming intellectual interest into professional opportunity. Neither of them could have imagined that less than 200 miles away, General Webb was reviewing preliminary background reports and planning a field assessment that would soon offer Arya opportunities far beyond anything they had discussed during their quiet evening conversation. The military's interest in exceptional capabilities operated according to timelines and priorities that civilian families rarely had reason to consider, and Arya's encounter with Stephen Rogers had triggered evaluation protocols designed to identify and develop strategic assets with maximum efficiency. By midnight, Webb had completed her preliminary review and authorized immediate deployment of assessment resources. Arya Collins would be evaluated according to the same rigorous standards applied to adult personnel being considered for classified projects, but with additional considerations related to her age and family circumstances. The process would begin within 36 hours, whether or not the Collins family was prepared for the attention their quiet life was about to receive. As Sunset Mesa settled into the desert night, two very different planning processes were reaching completion. In their modest trailer, Carla and Arya were concluding another day in the careful routines that had sustained them through years of economic hardship and social isolation. In Virginia, General Webb was finalizing mission parameters for an operation that would determine whether an 8-year-old desert mechanic possessed capabilities valuable enough to justify military recruitment efforts that could reshape her entire future. The convergence of these different worlds was now less than 48 hours away, though neither Arya nor her mother had any reason to suspect that their tomorrow would be anything other than another ordinary day in their predictable, if challenging, lives. Thursday morning brought the first subtle signs that Sunset Mesa's predictable rhythms were about to be disrupted by forces beyond the community's normal experience. Chief Deputy Buzz Carter noticed them during his routine patrol, two unmarked vehicles with government plates parked at strategic observation points around the town's perimeter, their occupants conducting what appeared to be surveillance operations. With professional-grade equipment, Carter had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before returning to Nevada and joining the county sheriff's department, and his military experience had taught him to recognize the distinctive patterns of official intelligence gathering. The vehicles were positioned to provide comprehensive visual coverage of the main roads leading in and out of Sunset Mesa, while their communications equipment suggested coordination with off-site command structures that operated far above local law enforcement authority. He called sheriff's headquarters from his patrol vehicle, speaking carefully into his radio. "Dispatch. This is Unit 7. I'm observing what appears to be federal surveillance activity in my patrol area. Request guidance on appropriate response protocols." The response came from dispatcher Carol Jenkins, whose 20 years of experience had familiarized her with the occasional federal operations that touched their remote jurisdiction. "Unit 7, we received notification yesterday evening about authorized federal activity in the area. You're advised to maintain normal patrol operations and avoid interference with federal personnel." Carter acknowledged the transmission while noting the implications. Federal operations that warranted advance notification to local law enforcement typically involved either national security concerns or investigations of significant criminal activity. Sunset Mesa had never been the focus of such attention, and its small population made it unlikely that major criminal enterprises were operating without his knowledge. 3 miles away, General Marilyn Webb was conducting her own reconnaissance from a temporary command post established in a recreational vehicle parked at a private campground outside town. The vehicle's exterior appeared consistent with typical tourist accommodations, but its interior had been converted into a sophisticated mobile operations center equipped with communication systems, surveillance equipment, and analysis capabilities that could support complex field assessments. "Target residence is confirmed," reported Colonel Ray Cooper, Webb's aide, as he studied real-time surveillance feeds displayed on multiple screens. "Subject appears to follow consistent daily routines. School departure at 7:45, return at 3:30, frequent visits to the local automotive repair facility." Webb reviewed the preliminary background investigation that had been completed overnight. Aria Collins's academic records showed exceptional performance in mathematics and science, with teachers consistently noting abilities that exceeded grade-level expectations. Her family's financial records revealed the economic stress that characterized many single-parent households, but no evidence of criminal activity or security concerns that would complicate potential recruitment efforts. "What's the mother's work schedule?" Webb asked, noting that successful recruitment often depended on timing initial contact when family dynamics were most receptive to discussion of new opportunities. "Double shifts at the local diner, Tuesday through Saturday. She typically leaves home at 6:30 in the morning and returns between 9 and 10 in the evening. The child is unsupervised for approximately 3 hours each afternoon." Webb understood the strategic implications. Unsupervised time often provided the best opportunities for initial assessment without parental interference, though ethical considerations required careful management of any interaction with minors. The Defense Department's protocols emphasized transparency with families while maintaining operational security during evaluation phases. "I want direct observation during the child's afternoon activities," she decided. "If Rogers' assessment is accurate, we should be able to confirm her capabilities through watching her work at the automotive facility." Burton's Auto Repair represented the perfect observation environment. The garage's open bay doors and customer waiting area would allow covert surveillance, while Aria demonstrated the mechanical abilities that had prompted this entire operation. Webb had personally evaluated hundreds of potential recruits over her career, but this was the first time she had considered conducting field assessment of someone young enough to still be attending elementary school. At Sunset Mesa Elementary, Aria was unaware that her normal Thursday routine was being monitored by federal agents, equipped with surveillance technology that could track her movements from distances measured in miles rather than feet. She completed her morning classes with the usual mixture of boredom and mild frustration that characterized her academic experience. The curriculum was designed for children her age, not children with her intellectual capabilities. Aria, could you stay after class for a few minutes? Mrs. Knight asked as the lunch bell rang. I wanted to discuss your thoughts on that renewable energy book. Aria approached her teacher's desk, noting the expression of concern that Mrs. Knight sometimes wore when discussing her academic situation. I thought it was really interesting. The chapters on photovoltaic efficiency were especially good, though some of the economic projections seemed overly optimistic. Mrs. Knight had taught long enough to recognize when a child's analysis exceeded her own understanding of complex subjects. Aria's casual dismissal of economic projections in a graduate-level textbook represented the kind of intellectual sophistication that belonged in university classrooms rather than elementary school discussions. Aria, I've been thinking about your situation, she said carefully. Have you and your mother ever discussed the possibility of academic acceleration? There are programs for gifted students that might provide more appropriate educational challenges. The suggestion wasn't new. Mrs. Knight had raised similar possibilities before, but Aria understood the practical obstacles that made such programs unrealistic. Advanced educational opportunities typically required resources her family couldn't provide, and disrupting her current routines would create additional stress for her mother's already overwhelming schedule. Mama and I have talked about it, Aria replied diplomatically, but we're pretty happy with how things are right now. Mrs. Knight recognized the polite deflection for what it was, a child's way of acknowledging adult suggestions while indicating that the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. Still, she felt obligated to document her concerns about Aria's educational needs, particularly given the growing evidence that standard curricula were failing to provide appropriate intellectual stimulation. Well, if circumstances change, please remember that there are people who want to help you develop your talents, she said, making a note in Aria's file that would later prove more significant than either of them could anticipate. The afternoon brought Aria's familiar walk to Burton's garage, where she expected to spend 2 hours diagnosing automotive problems in exchange for modest payment and the opportunity to observe professional repair techniques. She was unaware that her route was being tracked by surveillance teams positioned at strategic points throughout Sunset Mesa, or that her upcoming work session would be monitored by military personnel evaluating her potential value to national defense projects. Rex Burton was in an unusually good mood when Aria arrived at the garage. 3 customers had specifically requested his services based on recommendations from people whose vehicles Aria had previously diagnosed, and the resulting business represented significant revenue improvement for his struggling operation. Got a real puzzle for you today, he announced, gesturing toward a late-model sedan that sat in the main bay with its hood raised. Owner says it runs fine for about 20 minutes, then starts missing and losing power. 2 other shops couldn't figure it out, so he brought it here, hoping our miracle worker could solve the mystery. Aria approached the vehicle with her usual systematic methodology, beginning with a visual inspection of the engine compartment, while asking Burton about the specific symptoms and their timing. The intermittent nature of the problem suggested either temperature-related component failure or an electrical issue that manifested under specific operating conditions. Does the problem occur consistently after 20 minutes, or is the timing variable? She asked, running her hands along various engine components to check for heat buildup or unusual vibrations. pretty consistent timing, according to the owner. Runs perfect when it's cold, then starts acting up once it reaches normal operating temperature. Arya nodded, already forming hypotheses about potential causes. Temperature-related failures typically involved components that expanded or contracted with heat, creating intermittent connections or mechanical interference that didn't occur during cold operation. She began checking the obvious culprits: ignition coils, fuel injectors, and electronic sensors that were sensitive to thermal conditions. From her position in the customer waiting area, General Webb observed Arya's diagnostic process through equipment that could record both audio and video without detection. What she witnessed confirmed and exceeded Stephen Rogers' initial assessment. The child's approach to problem-solving demonstrated systematic thinking that would be remarkable in a trained technician, but in an 8-year-old, it represented capabilities that clearly warranted immediate development. "She's conducting a thermal analysis of electronic components," Webb murmured to Colonel Cooper, who was monitoring the surveillance feeds from their mobile command center. "That's a diagnostic technique that some of our trained technicians don't understand." Arya had moved to the vehicle's computer diagnostic port, where she connected a handheld scanner that Burton had reluctantly purchased after observing how effectively she used electronic diagnostic tools. The device displayed real-time data from the engine's control systems, providing information about sensor readings, fuel mixture adjustments, and ignition timing that could reveal problems invisible to conventional inspection methods. "There," she said after several minutes of studying the scanner's output. "The crankshaft position sensor is starting to fail when it heats up. See how the signal voltage drops as the component temperature increases? That's causing intermittent timing errors that make the engine run rough." Burton examined the diagnostic screen, noting the correlation between sensor temperature and signal degradation that Arya had identified. "How did you know to check that specific sensor?" The timing of the problem suggested temperature-related failure, and the crankshaft position sensor is one of the most heat-sensitive components in the ignition system. When it starts to fail, it usually happens gradually as operating temperature increases. Webb found herself impressed not just by Arya's diagnostic accuracy, but by her ability to explain complex technical relationships in clear, logical terms. Communication skills were essential for personnel working on advanced projects, and many technically competent individuals struggled to articulate their reasoning in ways that others could understand and verify. The sensor replacement took 30 minutes, with Arya providing guidance while Burton performed the actual installation. Look, when they tested the repair, the engine ran smoothly through multiple heat cycles without any recurrence of the original symptoms. Another impossible problem had been solved through Arya's intuitive understanding of automotive systems. "That's a $200 diagnostic fee plus parts and labor," Burton told the customer when he returned to collect his vehicle. "Our specialist was able to identify the exact problem without the trial and error approach that other shops might use." Webb noted the economic dynamics with professional interest. Burton was charging premium prices for diagnostics that Arya provided, while compensating her with minimal payments that represented a tiny fraction of the value she generated. It was exactly the kind of exploitation that the Defense Department's recruitment protocols were designed to circumvent through direct family engagement and fair compensation structures. As the afternoon session concluded, Webb had seen enough to confirm her decision to proceed with formal recruitment discussions. Arya Collins possessed capabilities that justified immediate development through advanced military training programs, and her family's economic circumstances created opportunities for mutually beneficial arrangements that could provide significant improvements in their quality of life. "Initialize contact protocols," she instructed Colonel Cooper. "I want to meet with the family tomorrow morning before the weekend disrupts normal routines." The decision meant that Arya's quiet life in Sunset Mesa was about to end, though she remained unaware of the federal attention her mechanical abilities had attracted. As she walked home from Burton's garage, carrying another $20 in payment and planning her evening homework routine, she had no way of knowing that tomorrow would bring visitors whose presence would force her family to confront opportunities and challenges far beyond anything they had previously imagined. The desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples as Aria reached her family's trailer, where Mrs. Suzuki was watering her garden and humming the same Japanese melody that had provided a soundtrack to countless peaceful evenings. It was a scene of perfect normalcy that would soon be disrupted by the arrival of military personnel, bearing offers that could transform everything Aria thought she knew about her future possibilities. Friday morning arrived with an oppressive stillness that seemed to press down on Sunset Mesa like a held breath. Even the desert wind had died during the night, leaving the air motionless and heavy with the promise of extreme heat. Aria woke earlier than usual, drawn from sleep by a sound she couldn't quite identify, a distant mechanical humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She padded to her bedroom window and peered through the worn curtains. At the pre-dawn landscape, the familiar silhouettes of Joshua trees and distant mountains were unchanged. But something felt different about the morning. The quality of silence had shifted, as though the desert itself was waiting for something significant to happen. "Mama?" she called softly, but there was no response from her mother's bedroom. Carla had worked until midnight at the diner covering for a sick co-worker and wouldn't wake for another hour. Aria dressed quietly and moved to the kitchen, where she could see more of the surrounding area through the larger windows. Mrs. Suzuki was already in her garden, but her usual morning routine had been disrupted by something that had captured her complete attention. The elderly woman stood motionless among her tomato plants, her face turned toward the eastern horizon with an expression of puzzled concern. Aria stepped outside, where the strange mechanical humming was more distinct, a rhythmic throbbing that suggested powerful engines operating at considerable distance. Mrs. Suzuki turned at the sound of the trailer door closing, her weathered face showing the kind of alert tension that came from decades of experience reading environmental warnings. "Do you hear that, Aria?" she asked, her voice carrying the careful tone people used when they weren't certain whether their perceptions were accurate. "Yes, ma'am. It sounds like helicopters, but they're still pretty far away." Mrs. Suzuki nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "I've lived in this valley for 30 years, and we don't usually get helicopter traffic unless there's been an emergency. Fire department, medical evacuation, that sort of thing." The sound was growing stronger, resolving into the distinctive rhythm of multiple aircraft approaching from the east. Aria had heard helicopters before, medical flights en route to Las Vegas, occasional military exercises that crossed Nevada airspace. But this was different. The pattern suggested a coordinated formation rather than emergency response, and the sound was becoming loud enough to indicate that Sunset Mesa was their intended destination, rather than simply a waypoint on their route to somewhere else. "Maybe we should wake your mother," Mrs. Suzuki suggested, her tone reflecting the cautious concern of someone who had learned to take unusual events seriously. Aria was about to agree when the first aircraft appeared above the eastern ridgeline, followed immediately by a second helicopter flying in precise formation. Even at a distance, their military configuration was unmistakable: olive-drab paint schemes, no civilian markings, and the aggressive lines that characterized combat-capable aircraft rather than utility transports. "Those are Black Hawks," Aria said, her voice carrying a mixture of fascination and growing apprehension. She had studied military aircraft in the same systematic way she approached automotive systems, and she could identify the distinctive silhouette of UH-60 helicopters from considerable distance. The helicopters circled Sunset Mesa twice, their rotor wash creating dust devils that danced across the desert floor before converging on what appeared to be a pre-selected landing zone approximately half a mile from the Collins family trailer. Mrs. Suzuki and Arya watched in stunned silence as the aircraft settled to Earth with military precision, their engines winding down to idle power while maintaining readiness for immediate departure. "Arya, go wake your mother right now," Mrs. Suzuki said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who recognized that normal Friday morning routines had been suspended by events beyond their control. Arya ran to her mother's bedroom and shook Carla's shoulder gently but insistently. "Mama, you need to wake up. There are military helicopters outside." Carla struggled toward consciousness, her mind initially rejecting information that seemed too extraordinary to be credible. "What did you say, baby?" "2 Black Hawk helicopters just landed near our house. Mrs. Suzuki thinks we should..." The sentence was interrupted by a sharp knock on the trailer's front door, followed by a woman's voice calling with calm authority. "Mrs. Collins, this is General Webb from the United States Army. I'd like to speak with you and your daughter about a matter of mutual interest." Carla was fully awake now, adrenaline flooding her system as she tried to process the implications of military personnel, arriving at her home without warning or explanation. Her first instinct was protective. Whatever had brought the army to Sunset Mesa, her daughter's safety was the only consideration that mattered. "Just a minute," she called, pulling on clothes, while her mind raced through possible explanations for the unprecedented visit. Arya had mentioned helping someone fix their car earlier in the week, but nothing in that casual description had suggested government involvement or national security implications. She opened the door to find a woman in army dress uniform standing on her front steps, flanked by 2 soldiers in combat gear who maintained respectful but alert postures. General Webb was in her early 50s, with graying hair and the kind of composed confidence that came from decades of command responsibility. Her bearing was professional but not threatening, suggesting official business rather than disciplinary action. "Mrs. Collins, I apologize for the early hour and the dramatic arrival," Webb began, her tone conveying both respect and urgency. "My name is General Marilyn Webb, and I'm here to discuss opportunities related to your daughter's exceptional mechanical abilities." Carla felt the ground shift beneath her feet as the conversation moved into territory she had never imagined navigating. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. What does the army want with Arya? May we come inside? This is a conversation that would be better conducted privately." Carla glanced past Webb toward the helicopters, noting the additional personnel, who were establishing a security perimeter around the landing zone. Whatever had prompted this visit was clearly significant enough to justify substantial military resources, but she remained focused on protecting her daughter from situations that might prove overwhelming or dangerous. "Arya, stay close to me," she murmured as she stepped aside to allow the military personnel to enter their modest home. General Webb surveyed the trailer's interior with professional interest, noting the careful maintenance and organization that characterized households where every resource was precious. She had conducted recruitment visits in settings ranging from suburban mansions to urban apartments, but economic circumstances had never been the primary factor in her evaluations of exceptional capabilities. "Mrs. Collins, 3 days ago your daughter encountered one of my personnel on Highway 341 and successfully repaired a complex mechanical failure that had disabled his vehicle," Webb began, choosing her words carefully to establish context without revealing sensitive information. The diagnostic ability she demonstrated and the systematic approach she used to solve the problem represent capabilities that are extremely rare and potentially very valuable. Carla looked at Arya, who was standing beside the kitchen counter, with an expression that mixed curiosity with growing apprehension. You told me you helped someone fix their car, but you didn't mention anything about government people. I didn't know he worked for the government, Arya replied honestly. He just seemed like a nice man who was having car trouble. Webb appreciated the girl's straightforward response, recognizing the genuine surprise that indicated her encounter with Rogers had been coincidental rather than planned. Your daughter's abilities extend far beyond what most people would consider normal mechanical aptitude. The repair she performed required diagnostic skills that typically take years of professional training to develop. What exactly are you suggesting? Carla asked, her protective instincts fully engaged as she tried to understand the implications of military interest in her 8-year-old daughter. The Department of Defense operates several programs designed to identify and develop exceptional capabilities that may prove valuable for national security applications. Arya's mechanical and diagnostic abilities represent exactly the kind of talents we're seeking to cultivate through advanced training and educational opportunities. The words hung in the air between them, creating a moment of profound silence, as Carla tried to process the magnitude of what was being proposed. Military recruitment of her daughter hadn't been among the scenarios she had considered when contemplating Arya's future. But the resources such involvement might provide could address every practical obstacle that had made advanced education seem impossible. You want to recruit my daughter into the military? She asked, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who was trying to understand complex proposals without committing to any particular response. Not immediately, Webb clarified. What I'm proposing is a comprehensive evaluation of Arya's capabilities, followed by educational and training opportunities that would allow her talents to be properly developed. The military would provide full financial support for her education, along with resources for your family that would eliminate the economic pressures you're currently facing. Arya listened to the conversation with growing fascination, recognizing that the adults were discussing possibilities that could fundamentally alter everything she had assumed about her future. The prospect of advanced technical education had always seemed like an impossible dream, but General Webb was describing opportunities that could make such dreams achievable. What would happen to me? Arya asked, her voice carrying the practical concern of someone who understood that extraordinary opportunities often came with significant complications. Webb turned her attention to Arya directly, noting the intelligent engagement that characterized her participation in adult discussions. Initially, you would continue living here with your mother while participating in specialized educational programs designed to challenge and develop your abilities. As you get older, there might be opportunities for advanced training at military facilities, but those decisions would be made jointly with your family. And if we say no? Carla asked, though she was already beginning to understand that refusing such offers might prove more difficult than accepting them. Then we respect your decision and withdraw, Webb replied, though her tone suggested that she considered such an outcome unlikely. However, I would encourage you to consider the alternatives. Arya's abilities are already being exploited by local business owners who are paying her a fraction of what her contributions are worth. Without proper development and protection, exceptional talents often become sources of exploitation rather than opportunity. The observations struck home with uncomfortable accuracy. Carla had always been troubled by Burton's arrangement with Arya, recognizing the economic imbalance while feeling powerless to demand better terms. The military's interest, whatever its ultimate implications, at least acknowledged Arya's true value and proposed compensation that reflected that recognition. I need time to think about this, Carla said finally. Of course, Webb replied. However, I should mention that other interests are also becoming aware of Arya's capabilities. Corporate defense contractors have significant resources for recruiting, exceptional talents, and their offers might not include the same protections for family autonomy that military programs provide. The subtle warning carried clear implications. The Collins family's quiet life in Sunset Mesa was ending whether they chose military involvement or not. Arya's encounter with Stephen Rogers had triggered attention from multiple sources, and maintaining their current circumstances was no longer among the available options. "How long do we have to decide?" Arya asked, demonstrating the practical thinking that had impressed every adult who encountered her exceptional abilities. "I'll be in the area for the remainder of today," Webb replied. "We could conduct a preliminary evaluation this afternoon, which would give you a better understanding of what we're proposing before any commitments are made." Carla looked at her daughter, recognizing the excitement and curiosity in Arya's expression. Despite the overwhelming nature of the morning's revelations, the opportunity to see her daughter's gifts properly developed and rewarded was tempting beyond measure, but accepting military involvement would mean surrendering control over decisions that had previously been theirs alone to make. "Can we discuss this privately for a few minutes?" she asked. "Certainly," Webb replied, stepping toward the door. "We'll wait outside while you consider the options." As the military personnel withdrew to give them privacy, Carla and Arya found themselves alone with decisions that would determine the entire trajectory of their future lives. The trailer felt impossibly small as Carla and Arya sat across from each other at their kitchen table, the weight of General Webb's proposal pressing down on them like the desert heat that was already building despite the early hour. Through the thin walls, they could hear the distant murmur of military personnel establishing their temporary command presence, a constant reminder that their quiet life had been irreversibly disrupted by forces beyond their control. "What do you think, baby?" Carla asked, though she was painfully aware that an 8-year-old shouldn't be required to make decisions with such far-reaching consequences. "This is bigger than anything we've ever had to consider." Arya stared at her hands, noting the permanent stains under her fingernails that marked her as someone who worked with engines and machinery. "It sounds like an amazing opportunity, Mama. Advanced education, proper training, maybe even college someday. But it also sounds like once we say yes, we won't really be able to change our minds." The observation demonstrated the mature thinking that had always characterized Arya's approach to complex problems. Despite her age, she understood that accepting military involvement would mean surrendering a significant degree of autonomy over their future decisions. The resources being offered were substantial, but they came with obligations and expectations that could prove difficult to manage. "I'm scared," Carla admitted, her voice carrying the vulnerability that she usually kept hidden from her daughter. "Not of the military people. They seem professional and respectful, but I'm scared of losing you to something I don't understand, something I can't protect you from." Arya reached across the table and took her mother's hand, a gesture that reversed their usual roles and demonstrated the emotional maturity that had developed alongside her technical abilities. "We don't have to decide right now. Maybe we should learn more about what they're really offering before we make any choices." Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door, followed by Mrs. Suzuki's familiar voice. "Carla? Arya? Are you both all right in there?" Carla opened the door to find their elderly neighbor standing on the front steps, her expression showing the mixture of concern and curiosity that the morning's extraordinary events had generated throughout the small community. Behind her, Arya could see other residents of the trailer park gathered in small groups, all of them staring toward the military helicopters and personnel that had transformed their quiet neighborhood into something resembling a combat zone. "We're okay, Mrs. Suzuki," Carla replied, though her tone conveyed uncertainty about their circumstances. The army is here to discuss some kind of educational opportunity for Arya. Mrs. Suzuki studied Carla's face with the perceptive awareness that came from decades of observing human nature under stress. Educational opportunities don't usually require helicopter transportation and armed soldiers. Are you certain you understand what you're being asked to consider? The questions struck at the heart of Carla's concerns. The military's presentation had been professional and persuasive, but the overwhelming nature of their arrival and the resources they had deployed suggested stakes and implications that extended far beyond simple educational assistance. "That's what we're trying to figure out," she replied honestly. Mrs. Suzuki glanced toward the military personnel, noting their professional bearing and the respectful distance they were maintaining from the Collins family's private discussions. "During the war, I saw how governments recruit exceptional people," she said quietly. "Sometimes the opportunities are genuine and beneficial. Sometimes they serve other purposes that become clear only later." Her words carried the weight of personal experience and historical perspective that neither Carla nor Arya possessed. Mrs. Suzuki had been born in an internment camp during World War II and had spent her entire life navigating the complex relationships between individual aspirations and government interests. Her cautionary tone reflected hard-earned wisdom about the potential consequences of accepting official assistance. "What would you do?" Carla asked, recognizing that her neighbor's perspective might provide valuable guidance for navigating their unprecedented situation. "I would ask more questions," Mrs. Suzuki replied. "Specific questions about expectations, obligations, and what happens if circumstances change. And I would remember that anything worth having is worth waiting for. Decisions made under pressure are often decisions that serve someone else's interests better than your own." General Webb appeared at the bottom of the trailer's front steps, her timing suggesting that she had been monitoring their conversation from a respectful distance. "Mrs. Collins, I don't want to interrupt your private discussions, but I thought you might benefit from seeing a practical demonstration of what our educational programs could offer Arya." She gestured toward a military vehicle that had arrived while they were talking, its cargo area containing what appeared to be sophisticated diagnostic equipment and technical training materials. "We've brought some advanced systems that would give Arya an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities while learning about technologies that aren't available through conventional educational channels." Arya's eyes brightened with genuine interest, recognizing the opportunity to work with equipment that represented significant advances over the improvised tools she used at Burton's garage. "What kind of systems?" "Computerized diagnostic equipment used for maintaining military vehicles, aircraft engines, and advanced mechanical systems," Webb replied. "The kind of technology that trained technicians spend months learning to operate effectively." The proposal was carefully crafted to appeal to Arya's intellectual curiosity, while demonstrating the military's commitment to providing resources that could properly develop her exceptional abilities. Carla recognized the strategic nature of the offer, but she also understood that such exposure might help them make more informed decisions about their options. Would this just be a demonstration, or would it represent some kind of commitment? She asked. "Purely educational," Webb assured her. "Think of it as an advanced aptitude test that would help us understand Arya's capabilities while giving you both a clearer picture of what our programs could offer." Mrs. Suzuki stepped closer to Carla, lowering her voice to ensure privacy. "Be careful about aptitude tests that might become recruitment tools. Once they have documentation of her abilities, it becomes more difficult to refuse their offers." Her warning reflected legitimate concerns about the ways that initial evaluations could evolve into more binding commitments, particularly when exceptional capabilities were involved. However, Carla also recognized that maintaining their current Circumstances was no longer a realistic option. Other interests were already becoming aware of Arya's abilities, and refusing military involvement might simply leave them vulnerable to less favorable arrangements with corporate entities. "We'll participate in the demonstration," Carla decided, "but I want to be present for everything, and I want clear documentation that this is an evaluation rather than a commitment to any particular program." "Absolutely," Webb agreed. "Complete. Transparency is essential for building the trust that any successful partnership would require." The military vehicle was equipped with diagnostic systems that represented significant advances over conventional automotive technology. Computer interfaces provided real-time analysis of complex mechanical systems, while specialized sensors could detect problems that would be invisible to traditional inspection methods. For someone with Arya's intuitive understanding of mechanical relationships, such tools represented opportunities to explore capabilities that had never been properly challenged or developed. "This is a turbine engine diagnostic system used for helicopter maintenance," Webb explained, as Arya studied the equipment with obvious fascination. "It can analyze thousands of data points simultaneously and identify potential failures before they become critical problems." Arya approached the system with her characteristic systematic methodology, first studying the interface design and then exploring the various diagnostic options available through the computerized controls. Within minutes, she was navigating the software with the same confidence she brought to conventional mechanical problems. "The data correlation algorithms are really sophisticated," she observed, her voice carrying the excitement that technical challenges always generated. "You could probably predict component failures weeks or months before they actually occurred, just by analyzing trend patterns in the performance data." Webb exchanged a meaningful glance with Colonel Cooper, recognizing that Arya's immediate comprehension of advanced diagnostic concepts confirmed and exceeded their most optimistic assessments. Most trained technicians required extensive instruction to understand the theoretical foundations that Arya was grasping intuitively. "Try running a diagnostic on this engine simulator," Webb suggested, indicating a training module that replicated the complex systems found in military aircraft. "See if you can identify the problems we've programmed into the system," Arya began the diagnostic process with the same methodical approach she used for automotive problems, but the complexity of the aircraft systems required significantly more sophisticated analysis. The computerized tools provided information that would have been impossible to gather through conventional inspection, but interpreting that data required understanding of advanced engineering principles that exceeded most elementary education. "In curricula, there are 3 separate issues," she announced after 20 minutes of careful analysis. "Primary hydraulic pressure is fluctuating because of a failing pump seal. The fuel flow sensor is providing inconsistent readings that suggest electrical connection problems, and there's harmonic vibration in the main rotor assembly that indicates bearing wear in the transmission." Webb stared at the diagnostic results displayed on the computer screen, confirming that Arya had correctly identified all 3 problems that had been programmed into the simulation. "How did you determine the relationship between the vibration patterns and the transmission bearings?" "Harmonic analysis," Arya replied matter-of-factly. "When bearings start to wear, they create specific frequency patterns that show up in the vibration data. The computer was measuring those frequencies, so I just had to correlate them with the mechanical systems that could produce those particular harmonics." The explanation demonstrated not just diagnostic ability but theoretical understanding of engineering principles that graduate students struggled to master. Webb had evaluated hundreds of potential recruits over her career, but she had never encountered anyone who could absorb and apply complex technical concepts with such immediate comprehension. "Arya," she said carefully, "what you've just accomplished represents capabilities that could prove invaluable for national defense applications. Aircraft maintenance, weapons systems diagnostics, even advanced research and development projects. There are dozens of areas where your abilities could make significant contributions." Carla listened to the conversation with growing apprehension, recognizing that her daughter's performance had exceeded even the military's expectations and would likely intensify their recruitment efforts. The demonstration had been intended to provide information for family decision-making, but it had also created new pressures by documenting capabilities that were clearly of strategic value. "General Webb," she said, "I appreciate the opportunities you're describing, but Arya is 8 years old. Even if she has exceptional abilities, she's still a child who needs to experience normal development and family relationships." "I completely agree," Webb replied. "That's why our programs are designed to support family integrity while providing educational resources that wouldn't be available through conventional channels." Arya would continue living at home and attending local schools, but with supplemental training that could properly challenge and develop her exceptional talents. The assurance sounded reasonable, but Carla had observed enough of adult motivations to recognize when initial commitments might evolve into more demanding expectations. Once the military had invested significant resources in Arya's development, maintaining family autonomy could prove more difficult than current discussions suggested. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a black sedan that approached the military perimeter at high speed, its occupants clearly attempting to reach the Collins family, despite the security presence that surrounded their property. Webb's expression hardened as she recognized the implications of civilian vehicles attempting to penetrate their operational area. "Colonel Cooper," she called, "we may have corporate competition arriving. Implement security protocols and ensure that the Collins family's privacy is maintained." The sedan contained 3 people in business attire, their expensive clothing and confident bearing suggesting corporate rather than government affiliation. As they emerged from their vehicle and approached the military checkpoint, their leader, a well-dressed man in his 50s, began speaking with the authority of someone accustomed to having his demands met quickly and completely. "I'm Glenn Foster, senior executive with Sterling Defense Contractors," he announced to the military personnel, blocking his access. "We have legitimate business interests regarding the Collins family, and we demand immediate access for competitive recruitment discussions." Webb approached the checkpoint, recognizing that their evaluation process was about to become significantly more complicated by the arrival of corporate interests whose motivations and methods differed substantially from military recruitment and protocols. Glenn Foster's arrival had transformed the morning's careful negotiations into something resembling a high-stakes business competition, with Arya's exceptional abilities serving as the prize that multiple organizations were determined to claim. The Sterling Defense Contractors executive approached the military checkpoint with the aggressive confidence of someone who had built a career on converting technical talent into corporate profit, regardless of the personal costs to the individuals involved. "General Webb," Foster called across the security perimeter, his voice carrying the calculated authority that characterized corporate recruitment operations. "I represent interests that can offer the Collins family opportunities significantly more attractive than military service. We need to discuss competitive terms immediately." Webb studied the corporate delegation with professional distaste, recognizing the predatory approach that distinguished private sector recruitment from military protocols. Sterling Defense Contractors had a reputation for identifying exceptional talents and exploiting them through contracts that prioritized corporate profits over individual development or family welfare. "Mr. Foster, this is a military operation. "On federal business," she replied, maintaining the neutral tone that preceded more aggressive responses. "The Collins family is under no obligation to entertain corporate recruitment efforts, particularly those that involve trespassing on secured areas." Foster's expression revealed the frustration of someone accustomed to having financial resources overcome regulatory obstacles. "The Collins family has the right to hear all available options before making decisions that will affect their daughter's future. Preventing competitive recruitment violates established precedents for civilian contractor negotiations." The argument was technically accurate, but ignored the ethical considerations that distinguished legitimate recruitment from exploitation. Corporate defense contractors often targeted individuals in vulnerable economic circumstances, offering immediate financial benefits while concealing long-term obligations that could prove extremely restrictive. Carla and Aria watched the confrontation develop with growing apprehension, recognizing that their personal circumstances had become the focus of institutional competition that extended far beyond their family's immediate needs or preferences. The military's protective presence had seemed reassuring when it provided security from unknown threats, but now it appeared to be preventing them from hearing information that might be relevant to their decision-making process. "Mama," Arya said, quietly, "shouldn't we at least find out what the other people are offering? We don't have to accept anything, but it might help us understand our options better." Carla nodded, recognizing that informed decision-making required comprehensive information about available alternatives. "General Webb, would it be possible to hear what Mr. Foster is proposing? We're not committed to anything, but we'd like to understand all of our choices." Webb's expression reflected reluctance to expose the Collins family to corporate recruitment tactics that were designed to be persuasive rather than informative. However, she also understood that preventing them from hearing competitive offers might create resentment that would undermine any future military partnership. "Very well," she agreed. "But I want military personnel present during any discussions, and I want clear documentation that the Collins family is under no pressure to make immediate decisions based on corporate presentations." Foster approached the family with the smooth confidence of someone who had successfully recruited hundreds of talented individuals through carefully crafted presentations that emphasized immediate benefits while minimizing discussion of long-term obligations. His expensive suit and professional demeanor were calculated to suggest success and reliability, while his manner conveyed personal interest in their welfare rather than corporate profit motivation. "Mrs. Collins, Aria," he began, his tone warm and seemingly sincere, "I want to congratulate you on raising such an exceptionally talented daughter. Sterling Defense Contractors specializes in identifying and developing technical abilities exactly like those Aria has demonstrated, and we can offer opportunities that might be more immediately beneficial than traditional military programs." Aria studied Foster with the same systematic attention she brought to mechanical problems, noting details of his presentation that suggested careful preparation and strategic intent. His approach was significantly different from General Webb's straightforward military style, emphasizing personal benefits rather than institutional service. "What kind of opportunities?" Carla asked, maintaining the cautious tone that had characterized all of her interactions with the competing organizations. Immediate financial compensation for Aria's consulting services, full college scholarships with no service obligations, and substantial signing bonuses that would eliminate your family's economic pressures permanently, Foster replied, producing a folder containing documents that outlined specific monetary offers. "We're prepared to provide a $250,000 signing bonus plus annual consulting fees that would exceed most professional salaries." The numbers were staggering by, any measure, but particularly impressive to a family whose annual income barely exceeded poverty levels. Carla stared at the documents, recognizing that such resources could transform every aspect of their lives while providing Arya with educational opportunities that had previously seemed impossible to achieve. "What would be expected in return?" she asked, though her voice carried the careful tone of someone who understood that extraordinary offers typically came with correspondingly significant obligations. Arya would provide consulting services for Sterling's advanced projects, approximately 20 hours per week initially, with opportunities for increased involvement as her capabilities develop, Foster explained. She would work with cutting-edge technology and contribute to innovations that could revolutionize defense applications. General Webb listened to the corporate presentation with growing concern, recognizing the tactics that had proven successful in previous recruitment competitions. The immediate financial benefits were designed to overwhelm practical considerations, while the long-term implications were presented in terms that minimized their significance. "Mr. Foster," she interjected, "you haven't mentioned the exclusivity clauses, the intellectual property assignments, or the penalty provisions that typically characterize Sterling's contractor agreements. Shouldn't the Collins family understand the complete scope of what they would be committing to?" Foster's expression revealed momentary irritation at having his presentation interrupted by inconvenient details that complicated his carefully crafted sales approach. "Those are standard contractual provisions that protect both parties' interests. The Collins family would have full legal representation during any agreement negotiations. Legal representation provided by Sterling's corporate attorneys," Webb clarified, "who have ethical obligations to serve Sterling's interests rather than the Collins family's welfare." Arya had been listening to the adult conversation with increasing fascination, recognizing that the competing presentations revealed as much about the organization's motivations as they did about the opportunities being offered. The military's emphasis on service and development differed significantly from the corporate focus on financial compensation and productivity. "Mr. Foster," she said, "what would happen if I wanted to stop working on projects, or if I decided I wanted to pursue different interests as I get older?" The question demonstrated the mature thinking that had impressed every adult who encountered Arya's exceptional capabilities. Despite her age, she understood that accepting long-term commitments required consideration of how circumstances might change over time. Foster's response was carefully crafted to sound reassuring while avoiding specific commitments that might limit Sterling's options. "Our contracts include provisions for renegotiation as circumstances evolve. We understand that talented individuals need flexibility to pursue their interests. But those provisions typically favor the contractor rather than the individual," Webb observed. "Sterling's standard agreements include penalty clauses that make it extremely expensive to withdraw from consulting relationships once they've been established." The military's protection of the Collins family's interests was becoming increasingly apparent as the competitive presentations continued. Webb's interventions were providing information that Foster preferred to minimize, creating a more complete picture of the choices being offered. Mrs. Suzuki, who had been observing the entire interaction from her position near the trailer, approached the group with the measured confidence of someone who had decided to offer her perspective, regardless of the potential consequences. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the authority that came from decades of life experience. "I've been watching this discussion, and I think there's something important that nobody has mentioned." All parties turned their attention to the elderly woman, recognizing that her intervention might provide a perspective that neither military nor corporate representatives were likely to offer. "Arya is 8 years old," Mrs. Suzuki continued. Whatever decisions are made today will affect the rest of her life. But she won't be 8 years old forever. Any agreement that doesn't protect her right to make different choices as she grows up is an agreement that treats her like property rather than a person. Her words carried the weight of moral clarity that cut through the sophisticated presentations and competitive offers to focus on fundamental ethical considerations. Both military and corporate recruitment efforts were designed to serve institutional interests, but protecting Arya's long-term welfare required prioritizing her individual development over organizational advantages. "That's an excellent point," Carla said, recognizing that her neighbor's observation had identified the core issue that should guide their decision-making. "Any arrangement we consider has to preserve Arya's freedom to make her own choices about her future." Foster's expression revealed frustration at having his recruitment effort complicated by ethical considerations that were difficult to address through financial incentives. Sterling's business model depended on securing long-term commitments from talented individuals, preferably before they developed sufficient experience to negotiate more favorable terms. "Of course we want to protect Arya's interests," he said, though his tone suggested that such protection would be secondary to Sterling's corporate objectives. "Our contracts are designed to be mutually beneficial and include provisions for addressing changing circumstances. But the penalties for early termination could be financially devastating for most families," Webb pointed out. "Sterling typically requires repayment of all development costs, plus punitive damages, if contractors withdraw before completing their initial commitment periods." The military's continued exposure of corporate recruitment practices was systematically undermining Foster's presentation, revealing details that significantly altered the apparent attractiveness of Sterling's offers. Carla was beginning to understand that the choice between military and corporate involvement was not simply a matter of comparing financial benefits, but rather a decision about which organization's values and methods were more likely to serve her daughter's long-term interests. "I think we need more time to consider all of this," she said finally. "Both organizations are offering significant opportunities, but we need to understand the complete implications before making any commitments." General Webb nodded approvingly, recognizing that thoughtful decision-making was more likely to produce successful long-term partnerships than pressure-driven choices that might later be regretted. "That's entirely appropriate," she said. "However, I should mention that our ability to maintain protective security indefinitely is limited. Other interests may become aware of this situation, and corporate recruitment efforts often become more aggressive when competitive pressure increases." The warning carried clear implications. The Collins family's window for making autonomous decisions was closing as more organizations became aware of Arya's exceptional capabilities. Delaying choices might preserve immediate autonomy while reducing long-term options. As the afternoon sun reached its peak, intensity above Sunset Mesa, casting sharp shadows across the desert landscape that had witnessed the morning's extraordinary events, Carla and Arya retreated to their trailer for the private family discussion that would determine the trajectory of their lives. The competing pressures from military and corporate interests had created a decision matrix of unprecedented complexity. But underneath all the sophisticated presentations and financial incentives lay a simple question: what would best serve Arya's long-term development while preserving the family bonds that had sustained them through years of economic hardship? "Mama," Arya said, as they settled at their familiar kitchen table, "I keep thinking about what Mrs. Suzuki said about protecting my right to make different choices as I grow up. That seems like the most important thing, doesn't it?" Carla nodded, recognizing that her daughter's focus on autonomy reflected the mature thinking that had characterized her approach to every complex problem. It does, but I also have to consider what opportunities might be available to you if we don't make some kind of decision now. General Webb made it clear that other interests are becoming aware of your abilities, and we might not always have the luxury of choosing between good options. Through their trailer windows, they could see the military personnel maintaining their protective perimeter, while the Sterling Defense Contractors delegation waited with obvious impatience for their response to Foster's financial offers. The scene resembled a standoff between competing forces, with the Collins family serving as the prize that would determine which organization achieved its recruitment objectives. "What do you think about the military option?" Arya asked, though her tone suggested she had already begun forming her own opinions about the relative merits of the competing proposals. "General Webb seems genuinely concerned about your welfare, and the military's transparency about Sterling's contractual practices suggests they're more interested in building trust than pressuring us into quick decisions," Carla replied. "But military service comes with its own obligations and risks that we need to understand completely." Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door, followed by Mrs. Suzuki's voice requesting permission to enter. They had come to rely on their neighbor's perspective during the morning's complex negotiations, and her intervention had proven crucial for understanding ethical considerations that the competing organizations had preferred to minimize. "I wanted to check on you both before you make your final decision," Mrs. Suzuki said, as she settled into the chair that had become her usual position during family discussions. "This morning has been overwhelming for everyone, but particularly for a little girl who shouldn't have to worry about such adult complications." Arya studied her elderly neighbor's face, recognizing the expression of concern that had characterized Mrs. Suzuki's involvement in their situation. "Do you think we should accept one of the offers or try to maintain our current circumstances?" "I think maintaining your current circumstances is no longer possible," Mrs. Suzuki replied honestly. "Too many people know about your abilities now, and they represent too much potential value for organizations to simply leave you alone. The question is, which arrangement would best protect your interests while allowing your talents to be properly developed?" Carla appreciated her neighbor's straightforward assessment of their situation. The fantasy of returning to their quiet life in Sunset Mesa had been eliminated by the morning's events, leaving them with the responsibility of choosing among imperfect options that each carried significant implications for their future. "What would you do?" she asked, seeking guidance from someone whose life experience encompassed both government involvement and corporate exploitation. Mrs. Suzuki considered the question carefully, recognizing that her advice would influence decisions that would affect multiple generations of the Collins family. "I would choose the option that provides the most protection for Arya's autonomy while offering genuine opportunities for her development. Money can be earned later, but childhood and family relationships can't be recovered once they've been compromised." Her words carried the weight of personal experience with institutional pressures that prioritized organizational interests over individual welfare. Mrs. Suzuki had witnessed how exceptional abilities could become sources of exploitation rather than opportunity, particularly when families lacked the resources or knowledge necessary to protect their own interests. "The military option seems more transparent," Arya observed, "and General Webb's interventions during Mr. Foster's presentation suggest they're genuinely concerned about protecting us from exploitative arrangements. But military service involves commitments that could affect my entire adult life." "That's true," Carla agreed, "but those commitments would be entered into voluntarily when you're old enough to understand their implications completely. The Sterling contract would bind you to obligations you might not fully comprehend until it's too late to change your mind." Their discussion was reaching a natural conclusion when General Webb appeared at their door, her timing suggesting that She had been monitoring their deliberations with professional patience while preparing for their final decision. "Mrs. Collins, Arya," she said as they invited her inside, "I wanted to provide some additional information that might help with your decision-making process. The Defense Department has approved a modified recruitment approach that would address many of the concerns you've raised about preserving family autonomy." She produced a document folder that contained significantly more detailed information than the preliminary presentations that had characterized the morning's competitive negotiations. "Instead of traditional military recruitment, we're proposing a civilian educational partnership that would provide advanced training and development opportunities while allowing you to maintain complete control over Arya's participation and future commitments." Carla studied the documents with growing interest, recognizing that the modified proposal addressed many of the concerns that had made military involvement seem problematic. What would this partnership involve specifically? Arya would participate in specialized educational programs designed to challenge and develop her exceptional abilities, but she would remain a civilian with no military service obligations, Webb explained. The programs would be conducted at nearby facilities, allowing her to continue living at home and maintaining normal family relationships. Financial support would be provided for both educational expenses and family living costs, but without the contractual restrictions that characterize corporate arrangements. Arya leaned forward, her expression showing the excitement that technical challenges always generated. "What kind of specialized education?" "Advanced mathematics, engineering, principles, computer science, and hands-on training with cutting-edge diagnostic and design systems," Webb replied. "The curriculum would be tailored to your specific interests and abilities, with opportunities to work alongside professionals in various technical fields." The proposal represented a significant evolution from the military recruitment offers that had initiated the morning's negotiations. Instead of asking the Collins family to commit to institutional service, the Defense Department was offering resources that would allow Arya's development to proceed according to family priorities, rather than organizational needs. Why would the military provide such resources without requiring service commitments? Carla asked, recognizing that understanding the motivation behind generous offers was essential for evaluating their true costs and benefits. Because exceptional abilities are rare and valuable enough to justify long-term investment approaches, Webb replied. If Arya chooses to pursue military or defense-related careers as an adult, the investment will have served our interests. If she chooses different paths, we will have contributed to developing capabilities that benefit society generally. Mrs. Suzuki nodded approvingly, recognizing the philosophical approach that distinguished genuine educational support from recruitment disguised as opportunity. That sounds like an arrangement that prioritizes Arya's development over institutional interests. What about Mr. Foster and Sterling Defense Contractors? Arya asked, demonstrating the practical awareness that had characterized her involvement in adult discussions throughout the day. They'll be disappointed, but corporate recruitment efforts often involve multiple targets, Webb replied. Sterling will redirect their attention to other potential contractors, and their interest in your family will diminish once they understand that you've chosen alternative arrangements. Carla felt a sense of relief at the prospect of eliminating the corporate pressure that had complicated their decision-making process. Foster's financial offers had been tempting, but the hidden obligations and penalties had created risks that seemed disproportionate to the immediate benefits. There's one more thing, Webb continued. The educational partnership would include provisions for regular evaluation and adjustment based on Arya's interests and family circumstances. If the arrangement stops serving your needs effectively, You would be free to withdraw without penalty or repayment obligations. The flexibility provision addressed the core concern that Mrs. Suzuki had raised about protecting Arya's right to make different choices as she matured. Unlike corporate contracts that locked individuals into long-term commitments, the military's educational partnership preserved autonomy while providing developmental resources. "I think we have our answer," Carla said, looking at Arya for confirmation. "Of their shared conclusion." "I agree," Arya replied. "The educational partnership gives me opportunities to develop my abilities without compromising our family's independence or my future choices." General Webb smiled, recognizing that their decision reflected the kind of thoughtful analysis that had prompted the entire recruitment effort. "I'll begin arrangements for transferring your family to military housing near the educational facilities, and will initiate the curriculum development process based on Arya's specific interests and abilities." "Military housing?" Carla asked, surprised by the implication that accepting educational partnership would require relocating from their home in Sunset Mesa. The specialized facilities are located near military installations that aren't accessible from civilian communities, Webb explained, but the housing would be significantly more comfortable than your current circumstances, and Arya would have access to resources that aren't available in remote areas. Mrs. Suzuki placed a gentle hand on Carla's shoulder, recognizing the emotional complexity of leaving familiar surroundings for unknown circumstances. Change is always difficult, but sometimes it's necessary for growth. Arya's abilities deserve development opportunities that simply aren't available in small desert towns. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape that had defined Arya's childhood, the Collins family found themselves preparing for a transition that would fundamentally alter every aspect of their lives. The educational partnership represented unprecedented opportunities for Arya's development, but it also meant leaving behind the community relationships and familiar routines that had sustained them through years of economic hardship. "When would we need to relocate?" Carla asked, recognizing that practical arrangements would need to be coordinated carefully to minimize disruption to Arya's social and educational development. "Within 2 weeks," Webb replied. "The educational facilities are preparing specialized programs based on Arya's demonstrated capabilities, and delays could compromise our ability to provide optimal learning environments." Rex Burton appeared at the trailer's front door, his expression showing the mixture of confusion and concern that had characterized most residents' responses to the day's extraordinary events. "Carla, Arya, I heard there might be some kind of government job opportunity. I wanted to make sure you understand that Arya's always welcome to continue working at my garage, regardless of what other arrangements you might be considering." His offer reflected genuine concern for Arya's welfare, but it also revealed the limited perspective that had prevented him from recognizing the exploitative nature of their previous arrangement. Burton's $20 payments had seemed generous within the context of small-town economics, but they represented a tiny fraction of the value that Arya's abilities could command in more sophisticated environments. "Thank you, Mr. Burton," Arya replied politely. "I've learned a lot working at your garage, but I think it's time for me to explore different opportunities." Burton nodded, though his expression revealed disappointment at losing the diagnostic capabilities that had significantly enhanced his business operations. "Well, if things don't work out with these government people, you remember that you've got a place here in Sunset Mesa." As evening approached and the military personnel began coordinating departure procedures, the Collins family spent their final hours in the trailer that had been their home for nearly 6 years. Mrs. Suzuki helped then pack essential belongings while sharing memories of the small desert community that had provided refuge during their most difficult times. "You'll always have a home here," she assured them, her words carrying the emotional weight of relationships that had transcended simple neighborly cooperation to become genuine family bonds. "But I'm excited about the opportunities that await you in your new circumstances." The Black Hawk helicopters that had arrived with such dramatic impact that morning prepared for departure as the desert sky faded from brilliant blue to the deep purples and oranges of southwest sunset. Idria stood beside her mother, watching the military personnel complete their final preparations while reflecting on the extraordinary sequence of events that had transformed her act of roadside kindness into a life-changing opportunity for educational and personal development. "Are you ready for this adventure?" Carla asked, recognizing that her daughter's exceptional abilities had created possibilities that neither of them could have imagined during their quiet years in Sunset Mesa. "I think so," Arya replied, her voice carrying the mixture of excitement and apprehension that characterized all significant transitions. "It's going to be different, but maybe different is exactly what we need." As the helicopters lifted off into the desert evening, carrying the Collins family toward educational opportunities that would allow Arya's exceptional abilities to flourish, while preserving the family relationships that had sustained them through every challenge, the residents of Sunset Mesa gathered to watch their departure. The small desert community had witnessed something unprecedented, the recognition and cultivation of extraordinary talent emerging from the most unlikely circumstances. Mrs. Suzuki remained in her garden as the aircraft disappeared beyond the eastern mountains, tending to the vegetables that would continue growing in the Nevada desert long after the Collins family had established new roots in environments designed to nurture exceptional capabilities. Her intervention had proven crucial for protecting a child's autonomy against institutional pressures that could have compromised her development, demonstrating that wisdom and moral clarity often emerged from the most unexpected sources. In the years that followed, Arya Collins would develop her extraordinary abilities through educational programs that challenged her intellectually while preserving her right to make autonomous choices about her future. The Defense Department's investment in her development would prove beneficial to both national security interests and her personal growth, validating the approach that prioritized long-term potential over immediate utilization. But the foundation for her success had been established in a modest trailer in Sunset Mesa, Nevada, where a single mother's love and an elderly neighbor's wisdom had provided the emotional security necessary for exceptional talents to flourish without compromising the human relationships that made such talents meaningful. The helicopters had carried them toward unprecedented opportunities, but the values that would guide their use of those opportunities had been cultivated in the desert community that had taught them the importance of kindness, integrity, and protecting the vulnerable from exploitation by the powerful. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch, and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.